In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbardis, Lizzy Haynes, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome, all you lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable, where we watch movies, then talk about them. I'm your host, Dustin Melbardis, and joining me today is my good friend and co-host, Lizzy Haynes. Lizzy, it's vacation time. Did you just get back from a trip?
Woohoo! You know what? I didn't. We have nothing on the calendar this summer, and that is the way I like it. We're living free of alarm clocks, free of plans, and it's the best.
Free of alarm clocks, you're still getting up by 6:15, I'm sure.
You know what? Everybody is letting us sleep in until 7:30. It's a treat over here.
Oh my gosh, 7:30? I just got back from a trip to Colorado. First
Nice.
time in anywhere that was not Denver. It was 15,000 feet up. It's 3 miles up. And I was in a hot springs resort. There was 42-degree mornings and 80-degree midday. And sitting in a hot spring that's 110 degrees while you see snow caps on the mountain, just an incredible experience. I can't wait to go back. Now, back in the weirdest, rainiest season in Texas where it's hot and miserable, nothing new there. Well, coming to you from Orange County, California, and the underrated podcast, that is our special guest, Derick McDuff. Say hello.
Hey guys, how's it going? Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.
Yay.
Welcome to the round table. Yeah, glad to have you. Tell us a little bit about your movie podcast, Underrated.
Yeah. So as the name would imply, Underrated is a movie podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, and ones that have slipped under the radar and kind of passed most people by. So it's an opportunity for me to talk about movies that probably wouldn't get reviewed on most other podcasts.
Smart.
For a chance for me to champion a lot of films that I feel like, nobody's really talking about this movie. Let me bring it up. Let me go in depth on it on my show.
Well, I was lucky enough when I saw that you were coming on our show that I looked up some of your past work, and I saw that you and your friends did a draft of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies.
Yeah, that's actually, so I do, that's for my other
Nice.
podcast that I do. I do one called Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones 2, where I talk about Marvel movies. So that was way back in the day.
Way back in the day, yeah. I think the thing I took away from that show, it was great to have all of your friends on there to kind of give their opinions. I think your friends didn't understand what a draft is. And
They had a little trouble with the concept. It took them a little while to get the hang of it.
I loved it because I think it's a little bit like herding cats when you have your friends on a podcast. And I think the first overall pick was Cloak and Dagger. I'm like, oh, I'm in for an episode. If this is yeah. And I think in general, what I love to take away from that show was the shared belief that Dave Bautista is a great actor, and he's always been a great actor, and that we're not just saying that because we don't want to get Bautista bombed.
Listen, all right? Like, Blade Runner 2049, we all saw it. We all know that he's a real talent. Man, I have not thought about that draft in a minute, though. That is a blast from the past.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to listen to. So I'll have to check out Underrated myself. Well, Derick, we like to start with some icebreaker questions. Please, for our audience, the roundtable listeners want to know, describe your favorite pair of shoes you ever had.
So growing up in the 90s, there was always like gimmick shoes, crazy things like with wheels or whatever. The one that was my favorite thing was, do you guys remember LA Lights?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So for those not listening, not aware, those are the shoes that when you walk, they would light up. And for me, like I was as like a, 5 or 6 year old, whatever, I thought that was the coolest thing in the entire world. But I think they were kind of a little expensive. So I only got the LA Light sandals, but I would wear those things everywhere. So every time they were like flip-flops. So every time they would flop, like it would just light up. And I was just like, I just thought I was the coolest kid in the world with my flip-flop sandals, like lighting up.
Yeah, if you are unfamiliar with these listeners, they were cool. Don't question us. They were very cool. Uh, yeah, even if we're talking about the flip flop version, same question for you, Lizzy.
Oh my gosh. Well, before I answer, my kids have those shoes now, but when my toddlers were very little, they had flip flops that had like squeakies in them, so that every single step that they would make would squeak. Those are uncool. Okay, we need to do away with those. Can we please lights cool, squeaks not.
This
But
is
my
our
favorite
official
pair of
position on the round table. Yes.
right. My favorite pair of shoes is one that I own currently. My husband, Aaron, who we love at the round table, he has been a guest before for Walk
Big
to
fan of
Remember
Aaron.
with Dustin. And he made me a pair of Dunks, of Nike Dunks, and used composed my favorite colors in them to create a cool pair of shoes that I personally feel too cool to wear, but I still do.
Very nice.
Yeah, that is good. I'd like to second that. Is that shoes that make too much sound are as uncool as shoes that produce too much light, which are very cool. When you mentioned flip flops, that is it's a little side. Uh, when people don't lift their feet when they're wearing slippers or flip flops, is enough to make me pull my hair out and want to end it all. It drives me crazy. Like Birkenstocks or other clogs or flip flop sandals. It doesn't matter. Just lift up your feet, people.
Right.
I'm with Lizzy here. My favorite pair of shoes is a pair of shoes I currently own. I have a pair of Timberland slip-on steel toe non-slip boots. Now, they
Nice.
aren't boots and they aren't Vans. They're kind of both. They're bad shoes for most people because they're not exactly right for the job you would need, but they're perfect for me. It's like they made this shoe for me and like my unique role in my company. And they are completely beat up, but it's too good. It's too ergonomic. I went the dad route, be like, well, the most comfortable and the most functional for my work. That's my favorite shoe.
Yeah.
Which is super lame. So we'll move on to the next question. Derick, what's the last movie you saw?
So I just saw Inside Out 2, which was like everyone else in the world, I think, because that movie made insane amounts of money when every other movie's been bombing. But yeah, very good movie. I'm a big fan of the first one. I think the first one was one of the greatest animated movies ever. This one didn't quite live up to that, but I really liked it. I went in going to cry, but that because the last one was about sadness was a big thing. This one, anxiety is one of the main characters, so I just almost had a panic attack watching the movie in a good way.
Oh gosh.
So be prepared for that if you're going to go watch Inside Out 2.
Now that does
man.
sound that sounds because it would be hard to reach that mark of Inside Out, which I thought was great. And we'll see. Inside Out 2 came out this year, so I guess I'll see it in 2034. Lizzy, what's the last movie you saw?
Okay, so I'm going to say the last movie that I saw in theaters because I've seen a plethora of children's movies since then. But I saw in the theaters In a Violent Nature, and I loved that movie. Now, I have to put a disclaimer just in the spirit of honesty that I had my eyes shut for a good amount of it because I was very scared, but it was so good. It was a really, really slow burn. It basically felt like a little bit like Friday the 13th, but from Jason's POV is as much as I can say without giving too much away. And some people, it's gotten a lot of mixed reviews for it being so slow. But when you really appreciate it from that perspective, it is a really good classic horror movie.
That's great. That's great. We'll see. 2034. Can't wait.
That's right.
For me, 2020 movie, which counts as a new movie for me. I watched The Hunt, which is about it's very much like that short story we read in school, The Most Dangerous Game. It's about hunting.
Oh.
But the thing about this movie is it is super tongue-in-cheek and very in-your-face about the difference of left-leaning and right-leaning media members, people that will say anything for whatever side they're catering to. And it's so in your face as like a parody that it's really delightful. I thought it was good. And then, you do get this kind of cool survival danger horror in it. but I think it's more fun than it is edge on your seat. But I liked it. Thought it was pretty good.
Is that the one with Hilary Swank? I think I've seen it now that you're saying
Yes.
this.
Yes,
Yes,
that's her.
yes. Okay, I have seen. I did really like that. And as a complete aside note, I really appreciate that movie because it has completely changed the way that I cut tomatoes, and I just think that I really appreciate the movie. Do you know what scene I'm talking about?
I must have been looking at my phone, distracted.
I really need to see that movie because I remember when it
If
was
you
going to
know,
come
you
out,
know.
it got delayed, like because of just some political things that were going on at the time. It got delayed, and then it was going to come out, and then it was like, cool, well, this movie's going to come out in April of 2020. Obviously, that didn't happen. So Damon Lindelof, I think, was one of the writers, maybe the head writer. So I'm a huge Lindelof stan. Like everything he's ever made, I like devour. I just never got to it because of all the delays, and then I never saw it in theaters, and I never got around to it on streaming. But I know it's on Hulu or something like that, so I need to watch it.
Very fun, worth your time, and you don't need to be devoted to the screen. It's a romp. It's a good time.
Nice.
But we aren't covering any of those three movies tonight. Lizzy, what are we covering?
We are going to be talking about The Red Shoes from 1948.
Starring Anton Walbrook, Marius Goring, Moira Shearer, Léonide Massine, Robert Helpmann, Albert Bassermann, Esmond Knight, and Ludmilla Tchérina. Released in 48, the budget was 505,000 British pounds, and we just don't really have good information on British box offices, so we don't really know where it placed. The number one movie that year was The Snake Pit. If we go to modern times, our IMDb rating is 8.1, and now here we go. Rotten Tomatoes, our critics' tomato score, 99%, and our audience score, 92%. So this was something where if you knew nothing, you knew that it was highly rated. Nominated for 5 Academy Awards, won 2 for Best Art Direction and Best Original Score. It also won Best Original Score at the Golden Globes winner at the Golden Globes. And while it doesn't have any AFI distinctions, it has found its way on several different top 10 British movies of all time. I think the highest that I saw this on one of these lists was number 4. A 2017 poll put this at, it's like number 5 or number 7, like best British movies ever made. And so that's high praise coming into this. Now, as our guest, Derick, we ask you to present movies, and then as the roundtable, we choose from those. So, listeners, we never just say we decide we want to watch this movie. That's a rare thing. We have our guests say here's some suggestions for what we should watch. So why did we land on The Red Shoes?
Well, with you guys being a retro show, I've in the past couple of years really tried to expand my horizons of retro movies, particularly stuff before the 80s, which I felt like had been lacking up till recently. And I only saw this one really recently, but it was one of those movies that immediately landed really well with me. And in wanting to talk about a movie from the past, I wanted to go back a little bit further. And this is a period when the Hays Code and stuff is going on, and there's not a lot of movies that hit for me in this time, but this one absolutely does.
And did you know anything about it? Was it from a list of these are the top 20 movies you should see at this time? Or what led you to this particular movie?
So it had been sitting in my watch list on Letterboxd for a while. I had seen Michael Powell's, so half of the Archers, half the directors of this movie. I'd seen his film, one you guys covered a while back, Peeping Tom, and I was blown away by how good that movie was. And had heard about his partnership with Pressburger, and was I really got to watch, if not a few of them, at least one of these guys' movies. And eventually, every couple weeks, I spin do a shuffle on my Letterboxd and watch one of the movies. This one came up, so I watched it, and was really just impressed, and I was glad it came up because it's a movie that I'd been thinking about for a while. I'd heard very good things. I watched a lot of video essays on YouTube and stuff, and this is, I feel a favorite of a lot of people that I follow. So it had always been on my radar through all those different means, and so finally, it was around December of last year I got around to watching it.
Lizzy, did you have any expectations coming into watching the Red Shoes?
No. So I've heard of the fairy tale, The Red Shoes, but if I'm being completely honest, I never actually made any kind of correlation between the two. When I first heard of it, my actual first thought was Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. So I felt that was where my brain went. And so as you can tell, especially people that have actually seen it before, I had absolutely no expectations, no idea what I was getting myself into. But as I was telling Derick before we started recording, one thing that I love about this podcast is that it has really expanded my palette for classic movies. And so I was really interested in seeing where it went. And especially after seeing the cover art and then being able to make an inference from that point. And I'm going to be honest, I really liked this movie. I mean, this movie to me felt like I was watching a play, and I really, really appreciated that, especially the actual ballet aspect of it, but even more so just the dialogue and the characters and the acting really felt like I was truly watching a stage play. And I actually really enjoyed every second of it.
Well, the movie is 76 years old. You feel like it holds up?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. I think it speaks to a kind of condition in terms of having to really choose between your passions and whether or not there's still space for love or truly anything else outside of that. And sometimes how consuming it can be, and it can either lift you up or be your demise. I mean, it's something that I think is still very much a prevalent topic today.
I'm glad I asked you, because that's maybe the best way I could have put it is whether your product or your experience or what your livelihood is and how it separates from who you are, and what do you put first? And this movie does give us the opportunity to see how those things separate, and I look forward to talking about it. Derick, did you feel like this was something where like it was on the list? Mm-hmm. And like the payoff for like, oh wow, like is this something that you enjoyed and also feel like it holds up?
Oh yeah, this is one of those movies. Like when I saw it, I was like, man, how did I live 3 decades of my life or whatever without having seen this movie? It just felt decades, like something like that. But like I was just like, I have missed out on this movie. It was like I could have been watching The Red Shoes my whole life. It's existed my whole life. Maybe not in the format that it exists now, which maybe we'll get into later. But yeah, like I was just like, you were talking about, Lizzy, about the what's on display is like the kind of struggle between your love and your life, and then your passions and wanting to create something, and that creative drive, and how a lot of times those things can destroy you. And I love a movie that delves into those themes. A lot of my favorite movies are ones that deal with that kind of stuff, stuff like Amadeus, or a movie that is, I saw this movie when it came out, Black Swan, and after seeing this, you're like, okay, wow, like Darren Aronofsky, he was just like, yes, The Red Shoes, cool, that one scene, yes, I'll put that, like, you're like, I see the parallels, I see where he was influenced, and
very much,
right, and
yeah,
I
very
just,
much so.
And I just absolutely love all that stuff. This was my first time going back to it since I watched it about 6 months ago, and because I was just like, that was like such a monumental viewing experience for me, and then I was like, all right, it's my first time revisiting, let's see how it holds up. And I think it held up very, very well. I still think this is a truly phenomenal movie that is saying so much about art and creativity and being a person, and just the way we express ourselves. And I don't know, I always think of that quote by Lady Gaga where I think she was just like fresh off a breakup or something, and she talked about like, if you're going to choose between a person and your art, always choose your art, because your art will never leave you, or something like that. And like those are kind of like the vibes that I got a little bit in this movie. But at the same time, it's like weird, because it's saying like, yeah, you sometimes you do have to choose between art and a person, but also other people can be some of the characters are like, oh yeah, like it's a distraction, but sometimes it's like, actually other people can inspire your art, then they can help you with your art, and by being close to them, you might create something greater. So I think it gives you kind of all these different perspectives on art and life, and art versus life.
If you needed a reason aside from reading the title of the podcast, aside from this being mine and Lizzy's first time seeing this movie, I watched it for the first time last night. If you listen to everything that Derick just said and said, this one isn't for me, then you're crazy and wild. Get out of here. We are going to do a little ad break. We're going to spoil the plot of this movie. So the time to watch is now. Listen to Derick. Think about all the things that like made us sort of excited to approach this movie, and we will see you on the other side.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason. And this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments, too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
And we are back, and this is your final warning. We are about to cover the plot from 1948's The Red Shoes. Lizzy, take it away.
Boris Lermontov, a world-class ballet director, is working on his new show based on Hans Christian Andersen's The Red Shoes with Julian Craster, a talented new composer. Vicky Page has caught the eye of Lermontov with her talent and devotion to her dance. The ballet is a massive success, and Vicky is a star. Throughout their time together, Julian Craster and Vicky have developed feelings for one another. However, in Lermontov's world, one cannot hold space for great dancing and love outside the stage. He fires Craster, but his plan is spoiled when Vicky leaves with Craster and the two marry. Sometime later, Lermontov finds Vicky and asks her to dance the Red Shoes once more. Craster and Lermontov finally duel for Vicky's affections. Craster leaves brokenhearted for the train as Vicky has chosen to dance. Vicky, in a fit of despair, or possibly the supernatural force of the Red Shoes, leads her to throw herself off the ledge of the train station. As she takes her dying breath, she asks Craster to remove the Red Shoes, her last moments reflecting on the role that catapulted her into infamy and ultimately her demise.
And we get our title card with a burning candle naturally reaching the end of its wick as we see Finis on the end there. What a plot summary and what a movie. Now this is a movie about ballet production based on the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. We got media wrapped up, and unless you were to say to somebody like, all right, hey, we're going through the best movies of the 40s and this is a top one. I want to start with a question for our guest. Derick, do you need to be looking for a drama about the inner workings of a stage production to enjoy this movie? Or is there something else that reaches out and grabs our audience?
I think that doesn't hurt, right? Because I'm somebody who, I have a background in theater, not in ballet necessarily, but I, was in that kind of world. I did do a little bit of backstage in some ballet stuff when I was in college. So that stuff is, if you are into that stuff, it definitely helps. But I don't think you need it necessarily. I think that if you are a creative of any type, or even if you are somebody who's had a dream and like been torn between doing something for yourself and, being in love, I think it does have a lot of universal themes that resonate with anybody who has kind of fallen in love or had these creative desires.
Love is often seen as this overarching power in all types of genres, but really it's a devotion to a craft in this movie that is really put on display. And I like that you said it's not necessary, but I think it does give you a little bit of a lure if you did work in theater or if you were someone who was involved in the performing arts. Lizzy, is the behind the scenes stuff of this movie it's more than just candy for the eyes, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So I enjoyed the ballet aspect of it because I was a show choir nerd in high school and college, so I loved it. But to me, the drama, the love triangle, so to speak, is
Yes, so to speak. Yeah.
that was true. Like that is the meat. Like that is actually where the bones live. Watching the pretty dancing and Vicky rise to fame, that part is to me, that's more of the candy, if anything else. Whereas really getting below to see what's underneath the surface in this turmoil that she's incredibly happy and thinks that everything is going great. And in the moment that Lermontov learns that they're in love, they're at his party and he's discovering in the moment they're not there, and that everybody reveals to them like, oh, no, there's a romance brewing. And
they're so happy to share it. Like it's
yes,
we all like this. Such a great shocking difference between how everyone views young love
yes.
compared to our Lermontov.
But it's so, to me as an adult, it feels so sad to watch her being in this spot where she has to choose. I think everybody at one point or another has felt, whether it's love or a passion or love or a career, or I think everybody just knows in some level what it feels like to have to make compromises or sacrifices. And even for our children or our families, like we all know what it feels like on some small level to know what compromising and sacrificing can look like. And this is, of course, a very hyperbolic version of that. So we can all empathize, but it's so deeply sad to see Vicky become completely destroyed from the inside out, to the point where she isn't really even the one making the decision at the end. It's Craster making it for her, because she's like, I love you. And he's like, but you love this more. And then he's the one that walks away. It's really sad. It's beautiful and tragic and so well done, but it is definitely leaves you feeling brokenhearted for everybody involved.
Derick, Lizzy mentioned that she was familiar with the name of, at least, of the Red Shoes fairy tale, and we have this mysterious, otherworldly use of this device, the red shoes that will, even though the girl is tired, the shoes dance her to death. Mm-hmm. Now that is revealed to us as part of the story pretty early in this movie, and so you're given kind of a twinge of maybe this isn't going to have the happiest of endings.
Right.
But if we start from the very beginning, we've got a kind of this great set dressing of a mob of people breaking down the doors to an opera house because they're so excited to see the premiere of some ballet. How does this sort of set the scene for what world we're going to be living in for the rest of this movie?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because it does a really good job of setting up that, like, these people, like, this is a world where people really, really care about this ballet. Like, and I like that they introduce, you have the two kind of factions, I guess is the best way to describe it. During that really first scene. And because like half the students there are like, we're here to see like the ballet, we're here to see the dancer, and the other half is like, we're here for the music. And it's really about, like, some people are there for one thing, some people are there for the other, but it's really about the combination of both, right? And I think that one thing this movie does very, very well is, in a lot of mediums are very singular. They're very auteur driven. One person writes a book. One person can write a piece of music, as they point out, or like one person could do a dance. But like when you're putting on ballet, or by extension when you're making a film, it is an incredibly collaborative process. And I think that by having this movie be a real, true, like, three-hander, basically, and having the director, the composer, and the dancer, these kind of three muses who together create the Red Shoes, and seemingly they all can like do great things on their own, but they're all kind of at their best when they are collaborating and making this masterful work of art. I think that's something that's reflected with the movie itself, because this movie is first of all, it's not directed by one person. It's the archers, Powell and Pressburger working together. But it's also, you have all the incredible acting that's being done in this, incredible cinematography, choreography, these great dance sequences. All this stuff comes together to make this a truly phenomenal film. And I think that that's there in the text. It's there with also like doing this kind of like, it opens like even before that with like, you mentioned the burning candle at the end. It starts with a candle that is fully, like just starting to burn. And you have the Red Shoes by Hans Christian Andersen on the book cover. So it kind of like sets you up that this is going to be a little bit of a fairy tale. It's almost like a meta modern fairy tale where it's like they tell you the story of the Red Shoes and like in the middle of the movie, and it's like, or the first half of the movie, and you're like,
right,
like you said, you're like, this is probably not going to end well, and you like the whole movie, you're like, oh no, she'll be okay, right? She'll be okay, and she's not going to, but you really want her to be, and then of course like the ending happens.
But
exactly
our source for our conflict isn't always quite so easy to see.
Right.
And there is a weave in and out of minor characters. I would say a triumph of this movie is to introduce it as we've got, I don't know, the first 10 minutes or so where we're kind of looking at this professor and his kind of touch and go friend, Lermontov. If you didn't know any better, you might think this is a movie that follows Lermontov. And this is one of my favorite things about some of old movies is you are presented with just if you know nothing, you're just presented like, am I following this guy? And then you realize, well, we are going to introduce Vicky, who is the niece of a patron.
Right.
Then you're going to introduce Julian Craster. And Julian Craster is a young student who all of his friends are helping him. Wait a second. That's your piece. This professor just plagiarized you.
Right.
And that's how he's introduced. So the weave in allows us not to pick, this is the one person we're following. And I think that's a triumph to be able to say, oh, we're kind of following the company as it goes in both forms of the word. We're following the production and we're following these people. And you begin for small amounts of time. Are you going to pay attention to Lubov, our choreographer? Are you going to pay attention to the kind of stuffy composer that Craster kind of takes the place of, Livy? All of this stuff kind of comes in. And so conflict abounds. Enemies abound at first when it comes to the difficulties of integrating into a new space, which both of our young protagonists have. And then you have this fickle personality of Lermontov. Lizzy, with Lermontov's introduction, I think he is fascinating on screen, even once you kind of, I think we either put him in a box or we label him as maybe a control freak. This impresario needs to be in charge. And we see this in so many different ways. Tell me about how this impacted your viewing.
So I clocked him from the very beginning. Again, without knowing what was going on. I think they did such a great job of giving you a nugget that was subtle enough that it would still allow you to watch the movie and watch things unfold on their own. But when he is in the very beginning, when you first meet him and he's talking to Vicky's aunt and they're talking about dance and she's saying how much she loves dance and he responds with her, but I'm paraphrasing, but he says, I appreciate that you love dancing and it's really important to you, but you need to understand that to me, it's a religion. And I don't appreciate when my religion's being practiced in a place such as this. So what that tells me, it's idolatry at this point. Like he is absolutely obsessed with something, which, I mean, we've all been guilty of it at a certain point. So no shade there, but it's this idea of you're so deeply consumed by it that at this point, I know at some point it's going to destroy you because you've just called it your religion. And then you also are, kind of like snooty, you're saying like, you don't really appreciate your religion being a practice in a place such as this. So to me, when he's talking to Vicky, he's not trying to get to know her as just a gentleman would get to know a lady. He is sniffing her out, trying to figure out whether or not she is worth his time. And so all of those things kind of compounded together. I knew he was going to be our villain. And I got to say, I've said this before on the podcast, a good movie is only as good as its villain. and he is a fantastic one. It's subtle. You could argue at one point that he's just as much of a victim to his obsession of dance as Vicky, but he also has, I think he's drinking the Kool-Aid, and he's just handing her a glass and almost forcing it down her throat at that point. And I find him kind of deliciously wicked.
There's something about that. We had mentioned before the break, Black Swan. Black Swan can't be made if this movie isn't made. Right. And we are lucky enough to cover the inspirations for great movies way later down the line on this show. And I'm thinking, well, there's other things too. Even though the basis for it is old, Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera feels similar to this. On a wackier take, Meet the Feebles is a lot like this. But the one that stood out to me is this seemed very Devil Wears Prada to me as well.
Yes.
This person in charge, devoted to the craft, more so than any other relationships or any other self-interest. And I love the way, Lizzy, that you said, hey, this is, a movie is only as good as its villain. And I think there are people out there who might not be so quick to call Lermontov the villain, especially when you see some of the things that he does for the betterment of our young protagonists. Derick, did you find yourself conflicted whether or not it was villainy we're seeing, whether it's self-righteousness we're seeing? Were you able to put him in a box, or was it something where, man, I don't know where this snake is going to slither?
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't exactly use the term villain. I wouldn't dispute it necessarily either, but I wouldn't. That wouldn't be the word I would use. Maybe I would say antagonist, but I do think that he is given equal weight to the other two leads, and you can kind of really see it from any of their points of view, because he's a jerk, but he's not necessarily wrong. Like, he is going about things in a really kind of like cruel, and even from like the beginning, when you see the other ballerina, she's like, oh, I'm getting married, and he's just kind of like, she is going to get, love is in the way, I have no time for her, and he doesn't even say goodbye to her or whatever. Like, you're like, okay, well, this guy kind of sucks, but like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know if this movie has a true villain as much as it's just like the clash between like, these different warring ideologies. And sometimes they're not even warring. Like, sometimes they're like in agreement, but they're just like, they all want the same thing. So they got to kind of like fight over it. You brought up a lot of those movies that had been influenced by it. And he kind of, his whole like, the craft over everything, over love, or over anything else. It reminded me a little bit of Remains of the Day, which is another, like, I haven't seen that movie in years, but it's another movie where like Anthony Hopkins' character is so devoted to his craft. In that case, it's, being a butler, that he has, no time for like a love life, and gives everything else up to completely just like be the greatest at his, chosen vocation. So that's one that it reminded me of quite a bit.
When you said butler, for some reason, now I got another thing that could be related to this, which would be the Grand Budapest Hotel, talking about Fiennes as the concierge. Although he takes a lot of liberties and does a lot of stuff outside of his perfection of his craft too, which that's the thing. Yes. Is I'm thinking to myself, do we ever actually see Lermontov enjoy himself? It's everything about his devotion to his craft is so tiring in a way to see.
Yes.
So we do get opportunities of levity throughout the movie, and I think they're really welcome. Lizzy, can you tell me about some of our side characters? For instance, I took a shine quickly to our Grisha Lubov, our choreographer. His presence,
of course,
is there to break the ice too, but his wants are important, but he's also able to let loose a little bit.
He's my favorite. He gives like Franck energy from Father of the Bride. I loved it so much. Yeah. I loved it so much. He was hands down my favorite. And I'm going to be totally honest. I'm going to put, when I say side characters, I think you could kind of argue that Craster is a little bit of a side character. I know that he is a part of this love triangle, but in terms of his his dialogue in the movie and kind of his role. I really do feel like I hate saying the no shade to Craster, but he's like just a little bit interchangeable
He
in
was
that
kind of
sense.
along for the ride. It was
Yeah.
a nice opportunity for him, a student, to be paid £8 a week plus expenses to go be a conducting coach. Or an
Yes,
orchestral
exactly.
coach.
Just along the way, it just so happens to. I mean, they have that lovely moment in the carriage, and I love that. But I think he's a great character. I love the very quick little part with the ballerina. I wish I knew her name, but it's falling off of it's slipping my mind. Where because she's a great representation. Where she leaves, she meets her
Irene.
fiance at the train. Yes. And he's like, this is amazing. Now you can like eat sweets and you don't have to get yelled at. And this is going to be so amazing. And you just keep running into all these people that kind of keep reinforcing that there's so much life to be lived outside of the stage. And it's almost like no matter how much joy she can find in her rehearsals and with the friends that she has and the people in the company, when her and Lermontov meet sometime later after her and Craster have married, the first thing she says is like, how is everybody? And like, she's just at the edge of her seat. Like in so many ways, these people have become her family. Yes. And it's a beautiful thing. But at the end of the day, it still wasn't enough.
Well, I think Lermontov himself uses the word family, but it certainly sounds different coming from his mouth.
Sure does. Yes.
I will second or third, I guess, that Grisha is the best. Like he's you really need him. Like he's such comic relief in this movie. Like he not all the time, but he does provide a lot of levity when you need it. And at first I thought you said he reminded you of Kronk, like from The Emperor's New Groove, and I was like, I could see that, right? Like because there's kind of a trio in that movie, and then there's like the villainous antagonist, and he's kind of the henchman who's like more upbeat and like doesn't always know what's going on, but is always just kind of down. I was like, okay, yeah, I see that. Yeah, he's very nimble.
When Craster's fired, and he's just like, no, like you didn't mean it. Like it's fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah. And this was a group that was initially hard to win over. And I think the movie does a good job showing us that, yes, this prima ballerina is worth everything that Lermontov is willing to invest into her. And you are shown that Craster is quite the savant, that he is very, very good. It draws to mind the scene where in retrospect, there's a little silliness to it. I think they have just gotten to Monte Carlo, and Lermontov summons Vicky to a place. Get in the car. I need you to meet me at this place. And she is dressed to go to a ball. Right. She's big.
She looks like a literal princess.
Yes. Just like, doesn't she have a tiara? Yeah, movie. She has a tiara on her.
I'm gonna double down on crown. That's like it's wild to me that and it's so. I mean, tiara is probably right, but the idea is like I'm like, wow, this is kind of crazy. She goes to this giant staircase that she climbs in this like ruined old building where Craster's just kind of hanging out outside. Yeah, I've been here since 7. Like he's not as bought in, which is why I agree with you, Lizzy, that he's. Maybe not so far as interchangeable, but like he's kind of along for the ride. He is not like pursuing some incredible passion as being part of the ballet because he knows that the composer has much more opportunity for work outside of ballet production. At least I think he's smart enough to know that, and he definitely says that when he is resigning or getting out of there. But in that scene, Lermontov requests that he rewrite something. And he says, like, when do you need it? I need it yesterday. And he hands him work that he'd already been doing. Like, I'm this good. I already knew that this needed to be done. And I like when a movie kind of reinforces the same way that sometimes in a movie you might have your handsome hunk walk down the road, or you might have maybe an aging star open the bar saloon doors, and all the ladies look over and kind of give a little eye to remind the audience he's still hot. to remind the audience.
Yes.
He's still, this character still draws us attention. It's nice to be shown that. And speaking of showing that, we've got the music and the dancing. Derick, if you had to pick one, what is it that's standing out as the treat, as the thing that if you were watching it for the movie experience, but there were these very specific talents being shown, which one of them is it for you?
God, that's tough because I feel like it's like, would you rather have a jelly or a peanut butter sandwich? They're so perfect together. But I think if I have to choose one, I think it would be the dancing. The dancing in this is so good, and they made specifically they were like, okay, and because obviously like I said, the score won the Golden Globe, it won the Oscar, but they specifically were like, we don't want to get actors who can dance, we want to get dancers who can act. And it's incredible that Moira Shearer is this good, because this is her first movie. She was not an actress before this. She was a ballerina. And a lot of the people who are the dancers in this were not actors. And they absolutely kill, especially her. It blows my mind that she's this good in her first ever movie and was doing a different thing. So yeah, I have to say the dancing in this is phenomenal. It's, it really captures, I think, sometimes when you see a live performance of something just recorded, it's like it doesn't really translate from the experience you get in the theater. But this, by shooting it like a movie, by making it very impressionistic, by doing all these insane cool things with the dancing, I think that really helps set it apart from pretty much anything else.
There are movies, I think about Singing in the Rain. I think about a wintertime classic for me, White Christmas, where the dancing is a big part of it, but creatively shooting the dancing is maybe what puts this expression of the art over the top. Lizzy, did you find yourself with the dancing here something where you were mesmerized? And I gotta say, listeners, if you didn't clock it, I did. 17-minute ballet sequence in the middle of this. So you get plenty of opportunity to sink your eyes into this.
Yes, it was so beautiful. And I love the ballet. And I actually, if I had to choose, and I can certainly go into it, but I probably would be more of the music faction than the ballet faction. But I agree that when they're put together, it's just dynamite. And I love ballet as a form of storytelling. It is just so beautiful. And I loved watching the sequence of the red shoes. And of course, there's all the cute little parts in the beginning, and you have the tailor who is who looks, so evil, but all in the most but in a true evil way, where he's inviting and friendly and attractive, and all the way where he's trying to draw you in, but he's evil, which to me makes it just all this the more frightening. And he and taking it to the carnival, the sequence when she's dancing and you watch the kind of colors fall down, and then she's dancing in the mountains, and it was unbelievable. And that last sequence when she's dancing with almost looks like a newspaper to try to show the sequence of time spinning, that to me it's just her and almost just paper. And it's just truly spectacular. And I know that they of course took some liberties in terms of the shoes being able to just magically pop on her feet, or the dancer, the paper kind of being able to materialize into a person and to a Father Time type of role. But that did not take away from the fact that in that 17 minutes, you were absolutely captivated. And it really does feel like you were in a theater watching a show. I really, really appreciated it about that movie. It was a beautiful
I have to tell
scene.
y'all, I started this movie too late. I wanted to watch the first half and then get a good night's sleep and an early morning and then finish the movie the next day. And I watched the whole thing because I couldn't look away. And I was that heavily invested. And it was that dance sequence, the ballet, the red shoes, that really, really drew me in. And I had to know more because also the biggest conflict comes way late. We have to solve a lot of stuff with 32 minutes left. And that's fun. There's a little bit of like excitement, like we don't have much time here to figure all this out. It reminded me, gosh, there was something that you just said that reminded me of. You said they took a little liberty with how they shot the ballet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Derick, I'd like to get your opinion on the cinematography for the whole movie, but of that scene as well. But there was something that we covered about 2 months ago. We were talking about the movie Tron. Tron, we'll agree to disagree there. But Tron, spoilers for our own show, Tron was disqualified for Best Visual Effects at the Oscars because they used computers to help. One of the most bogus things the Academy has ever done. Academy known for bogus decisions.
Yeah.
So we have here where there are critics of this movie who would say, that's not how you show ballet. Well, tough luck. It made it dynamic. It made it really something special. And yeah, we get it. 75 years ago, effects weren't quite what they were, but to pull off what they could was really something. Was there stuff about our cinematography here, Derick, with that scene, or even just the late 40s, that really popped out to you?
Yeah, I think, that whole 17-minute sequence, it has to be one of the greatest, sequences in movie history, in my opinion. Like, it is spectacular because, and I think like on its own, if you just watch it on its own, you're like, that's incredibly moving and stuff like that. But in the middle of this movie, with the introduction building up to it and then seeing where it goes afterwards, it's even more powerful. And yeah, the look of it is just so unique. The fact that they were able to pull this off in the 40s, they were able to do all these, techniques that, today would be considered very like low budget, or like, like they don't have any, they're not able to do the Tron thing where they're able to like use any computer and excuse me, they just did it with just like all these old school tricks, like stuff that Nolan like goes crazy for, and like you mentioned, Lizzy, the scene where she jumps into the red shoes and they kind of tie it. That is one of the coolest shots I've ever seen. I just remember watching it.
Great shot.
I was like, that because
it's so fun.
It's so fun. It's so cool, and it also just conveys visually. These shoes now have a hold on her, like it, and it also like lets you know like this is what we're going to be watching now for the next 17 minutes is very surreal. It's not going to be like realistic, and even sets up the ending of the movie, where the ending of the movie you're like, was this meant to be realistic, or was this like the shoes taking over her like they did in the dance in the middle? And I think this is just, it looks so good, and a big part of that is because this was shot on Technicolor, and a lot's been made about how good Technicolor looks, especially red on Technicolor. And obviously the reds are so prominent in this movie. Obviously the shoes, Moira Shearer's hair looks so good, and there's like bits and pieces and points. That whole scene, it doesn't overwhelm you with color. It is very, there's lots of color that this looks really good, but there's points that are muted, and then a certain thing will pop. So I wanted to ask you guys a question. Can you think of like a modern movie that utilizes colors as well as this one does?
There's only one, and it was my very first dealer's choice on this show. And I say modern, but it is, I guess, 15 to 20 years old now. But it is a Jet Li movie called Hero.
Oh,
that,
okay.
Is incredible with color. But aside from that being my, like, kind of, it's in my noggin, like, oh, that is a like perfectly colored movie. I can't think of anything right now like that.
Oh, man, I agree. I think it's really hard. And today it's also really challenging because, to the Tron argument, there's so much that's being done with computers that it's really hard to know what's authentic and like what's actually being authentically shot and what's not.
Bond movies get the benefit of being able to fly all over the world and blow an insane budget on shooting on location. But like there's not a big pool to pull from, Derick, I think is what you're getting, is that nothing quite looks the same way that Technicolor looks, the way that Oz looks when you first open the door.
Yes, that was my first thought as well. Was Wizard of Oz? Was how
And that might not be Technicolor. I don't know.
I think it is. I think it was a big deal that one was Technicolor. I think it might have been one of the first Technicolor films, if not the first. I don't know. I'd have to look that up. But yeah, I think
striking.
Right,
Even
it looks so good.
Yeah,
and you brought up a couple. Yeah, you brought up like Sound of Music and a couple others that I think a lot of these great Technicolor films of the past, and I feel like a lot of movies today are a little more washed out. Like I love the Marvel movies obviously, but I think that they have a much more like muted tone. The only one I would say from the last 10 or 15 years would be Speed Racers. The only thing maybe some George Miller stuff, like Furiosa was really colorful and great, and some animated things, of course. But as far as live action goes, I would say Speed Racer is probably the only thing that kind of reaches this level.
To get back to the red shoes and this vibrant scene, which is vibrant in like a low depth, is that it's not particularly dark. There's words you don't want to use, but it's very deep. And then you just also think about the luxury or the technique of when a movie like this when a movie like this uses close-up techniques on faces or straight into the camera shots.
Yeah.
There's times when you might say that seems dated, but it's dated in that antique way that you love.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I found myself saying, because it's not nostalgia, I didn't live it, but it is something that's like, this is a relic. And I felt like this was a gorgeous relic of what movies used to be. I think La La Land would want to harken back to something like this, but La La Land is bright, and this is a cautionary tale. This is dangerous. Lizzy, would you call this movie horror?
I think it definitely could fall under a psychological horror umbrella, certainly, in the aspect that I think your passion being the thing that kills you, I think that can be certainly scary. I think when you think about the idea of being lured into something, there's certainly with the shoemaker of the red shoes, there's definitely kind of like some Adam and Eve parallels to it, if you will. So there's a lot of fear in that aspect of feeling like you're being coerced into going down a road that is a dangerous one. But then also there's this supernatural element to it at the very end, would make you really question. It's kind of more in a literal sense of falling into the horror guise of like, are these red shoes actually, is there something supernatural about them? Is there something evil about these shoes? Or is it really just all in her head?
Another lesson that Aronofsky absolutely uses to perfection is just that hint of things aren't quite what they seem.
Right.
Yes.
And I think this movie ends with that. Derick, did you find that the ending here with not knowing, I mean, we have a short amount of time to go from our biggest conflict to our young protagonist leaving the company to the show kind of goes on, Irene comes back. There's something that is so alluring and sinister about the decision Lermontov makes, which is, hey, I hear Irene's around. Do you want to set up a meeting with her? And he says something like, make it by chance.
Yeah.
As if he has the power to set, I think he sets up like an outdoor fashion show or something.
He's like, oh, Irina!
What are you doing here? Yes.
Yeah.
That as we get to our culmination of how this ends up, this is something where, like, I don't know if it was the size or the impact of her throwing herself off while the train was going by, but this movie does leave you with a, like, wow, things escalated fast. And how does the ending sort of feel with you, Derick, about, like, the journey that we went on? Were we destined for something that seemed so tragic?
Yeah, it's one of those endings, like I kind of alluded to it earlier when I was like, you kind of feel like it's coming, right? There's a lot of foreshadowing to it, but you're like, no, it doesn't have to happen, right? You're kind of just hoping and wishing, like, no, they
found
get
love.
out
They're
of this.
happy, yeah,
right, yeah. They ran away, they got away from him, and then she goes back, and you're like, this is this is not going to end well. And then, of course, it doesn't. And, it has those bookends literally with the actual book, but also figuratively when, you see when her character dies in the stage production, and she's kind of, has the boy, as he's credited in the play within the movie, she asks to remove the shoes, and then you have her asking Craster to take off the shoes, and you're like, I love the ambiguity of it. Like, did she do this to kill herself? Was she just trying to run back to Craster? Was it the shoes somehow possessing her because this is a dark fairy tale? And then you have, Lermontov give that like really great heartbreaking speech where he's like, we're going to perform it. And you see it like being performed without her, and just the spotlight there, and knowing that this is like just kind of this light that the world will never see again. It's
a strange honor and kind of a perversion. It's so very strange.
Yes, very eerie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, his cadence, Lizzy, in the way that he's talking. Like, I understand that in a British movie, that especially with a lot of Russian names, that sometimes our characters' accents kind of they hit different standard deviations of like how strange they hit your ear. But boy, does he seem alien at the end.
Oh my gosh. I have thoughts about that. But yes, I think I'm not sure if it was intentional, because I felt very perplexed by his tone and the cadence in which he spoke. I felt I could not clock it. It was like he was yelling, but not angry. And then it was only at the very end that they do a close up on his face that you can actually start to see the tears welling up and the emotion there. And then everything in his voice completely slows and becomes a little bit more human. And I have to imagine that was intentional, but I cannot quite understand why, unless that was the point of like trying to unsettle you. Because one question that I think they want us to leave with throughout the whole movie is, what is Lermontov's obsession with Vicky? Does he love Vicky and he's just been jealous of he wants to be in Castor's place? Does he just like what Vicky is able to do for him? And he actually finds that like Vicky as a human being is completely interchangeable. He just likes her feet and the fact that she's a star and will dance for him. It's like we can't really put a pin in exactly what was it about Vicky for Lermontov. So I think maybe his very like ambiguous, strange announcement is trying to make sure that it doesn't pull any preconceived notions about how he felt about her, possibly. But it was very strange.
It's so great that they don't lean into this kind of mentor-mentee power dynamic romanticism.
Yes.
Because it's right there for the taking, and so commonly a nasty thing to think about. But yeah, it is such a wild ending for his character. So this world that we get a glimpse of, we're in it, and then we kind of come out of it. We are in the audience chairs. We're in the rows of these theaters as we're sitting on our couches watching this movie, and we enter and leave that way. But this movie, before we hit our superlative section, I just think this movie's atmosphere, the time period, the locations, the inside, the back rooms of this industry is so fascinating. Because I'm not a part of it. Derick, you said you had some sort of stage production time. I never did. I'm a guy who people say, like, you were a theater guy, weren't you? And I'm like, no, never. I love it and would have loved to do it, but I was a band kid. No time for both of the arts in Tennessee.
I can relate to that.
So there's the world of inside, but then there's also this lavish place outside of all these locations that you're in. We get to see the lovely Mediterranean. Lizzy, you mentioned the carriage ride. Tell me about the the atmosphere here, whether it's a combo of the wardrobe, whether it's the makeup, the way that news comes across, the way that things are written down. I think that this movie is far more immersive than most 40s and 50s dramas, noirs, or even musicals I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think it definitely, immersion is a very good way to describe it, because I feel like it really puts you in this time period, this place. You're in Europe. There, it's very glamorous, but it's not completely just like it's not a total fairy tale. It's very a meta modern fairy tale, but it's like based on like things that we're familiar with real life, and then when it gets more fantastical,
it's
you
glamorous without being super opulent.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That wall that keeps most of us away from caviar, like it's glamorous. Yeah, I see. That's a great word for it.
But yeah, and you like, as somebody who's like, I was a theater major, I was an actor, but then when you're in theater, you also have to crew so many shows. So it's interesting. Like, it's so different being in the audience, being backstage, and being on stage. They're all completely different mindsets and realms that you have to be in. And this movie does a good job of kind of capturing all of those at varying points and making you like feel like you are in this fantasy that is rooted in reality.
A reality that movies do such a great job of showing you in however much percentage of the reality that you get for the industry, for the world, for the club, for the scene. There's you can have movies that are immersion about crime families. You can have movies that immerse you into going out to the rave, or about being in the backyard bonfire parties. Like there's things that can immerse you in all types of things, but most things we're immersed in are things that we have a little bit of connection to. Even something like the financial world or like Wall Street, we kind of have an idea. There's stuff about this sort of ballet world or this performing arts world, Lizzy, where I feel like you a lot of people, this is brand new to. Mm-hmm. And so I think my first question to you earlier, Derick, was like, how do you get someone involved with this movie? And Lizzy, the questions for you is, I don't even know how to phrase it. Is the allure of something so unknown, like how a ballet production goes from nothing to top of the world, is that a draw for you?
I think so. I think that there's everybody, like, we all love to be entertained, of course, and so there's so many different forms of entertainment. But when I think of ballet, even if you're unfamiliar with ballet, I think that everybody can agree that there's a certain level of decadence that's associated with ballet. It's something that it's just you're associated with, like, you're going to get just dressed up and you're going to go to a theater and you're going to watch ballet. Mm-hmm. I think it's really interesting to watch from the other side. It is really cool to kind of see how the sausage gets made, so to speak. And I do think that it brings a little bit of an allure, because ballet is, of course, as we know, it's storytelling through music and through dance. But yet watching how everything gets catapulted to this massive fandom and seeing how the Red Shoes turns Vicky into a complete and total star, we're able to watch storytelling that is almost kind of meta and layered, but in a completely different way, whether it be done through music and dance, but now it's being done through character development and storytelling through the dynamic of these different characters and the kind of plot.
In a setting that you might not know about.
Yes.
2 years ago, maybe it's just last year, Lizzy, you and I covered The Wrestler. Speaking of
yes.
Lizzy, you wouldn't have said you were interested in pro wrestling before.
No.
And I believe we said it on the show. And I certainly wasn't interested in learning about phonics when I first watched The King's Speech.
Right.
But this is a lesson for all of our listeners that this is a movie about ballet production. You don't have to know anything about it. You don't have to even like be drawn towards it. Like, there are incredible stories told on the football field, and there are incredible stories told in like the high-rise offices, and sometimes the impact of this balance, this conflict between the needs of like the actor you're watching and the person, and what they want and what they love, compared to the needs of the production or your art that lasts. I would say earlier what you said, Derick, I would maybe disagree with that Lady Gaga thing, is choose art over self, however you phrased it, or however she phrased it. Choose self first every time. That's a hard lesson it took me 36 years to figure it out. But this movie, we do have one person who chooses self and the other person who is so conflicted it leads to their death. And I got to say, it's not all, every time, but I've enjoyed talking about this movie as much as I enjoyed watching the movie. And I want to talk about it more, but I want to do it in our superlative section. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. So for the red shoes, Derick, who is your MVP?
I think it was Moira Shearer. I think that she, like I said, it's incredible that she is able to be as good as she is in this movie with basically no acting experience, because it's a phenomenal role. She obviously is not only such a good actor, but an incredible dancer. And just like, even like her look, like seems like it was like made for this movie, like that vibrant red hair. She's very tall, like very ballerina. So she absolutely kills it. Like, there's a lot of people I think it could go to, but I think that if she isn't as good as she is, this movie isn't a masterpiece that it is.
That's a really good point, and a great use of MVP as a sports term. That makes a lot of sense. Is this movie what it is without Moira Shearer? Lizzy, your MVP.
I put the same, and for all of the reasons that you just mentioned, and it just blows my mind, to your point, that this is her debut film. And I've got to say, to her credit, they do so many close-up shots of her face. And that can almost be because it's giving you a camera angle of kind of almost feeling like you're entering into her personal space. So, even if you're watching from a screen, it can still kind of feel slightly uncomfortable. But her facial expressions and her ability to emote, that's very, very challenging to do with a camera so close up to your face. And I just think she did a phenomenal job. I really agree that the movie stands on her back.
She did a phenomenal job. I probably should have chosen it. Now that we've talked about it so much, I did go with Anton Walbrook as Boris Lermontov because I like our weirdos. I love our weirdos, our eccentrics, our mad with powers, our antagonists in a way. And I think it is fair to call him a villain, but I think it wouldn't be fair to call him evil. He's a driven villain, and that is as fun as other types of tropes out there. Is he's a Javert in a way. Like, this is what I have to do. And it's, there's too many references to make. We got to move on.
Oh my gosh, if he's Javert, does that mean that his moment where he's announcing, could it be that's his like, I forget the song that he sings. I'm so mad at myself. But that song that he sings where he's like, where he's like having his dilemma of like, do I keep chasing after Jean Valjean or not?
Yeah, we can edit this out if we have to, but keep going. I want to get to the bottom of this.
He's like, and he like throws himself off the ledge. You know what I'm talking about? Where
Javert's suicide. Yeah.
But he has this kind of like almost like a come to Jesus moment where he realizes that his duty has come before his ability to discern between actual right and wrong. And so I'm curious if I never thought about the parallel to draw there, but it's quite possible that his emotion at the very tail end could have been that kind of moment of him realizing that like his drive of trying to create a beautiful dancer has, to your point of him not being evil, he probably never knew that it would lead to her death. So it's like probably his moment of realizing like I've gone too far. I've taken this too much.
There was a moment where I was really thinking, is the red shoes going to be about his own demise
Yes.
instead of his dancer's demise? But yeah, like immediately I'm like, who is this man? What sort of devil is he? You talking about trap? Was his hour at last to put a seal on my face? Edit all this out.
Oh, I love it so much.
Trevor is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time.
Such a fan.
Like
he's
just the best.
I will join these people's heroes. I will follow.
Yes.
All right.
And I'm Trevor.
I love it. So that was like the one of the first musicals I ever saw. I was like, loved it.
Me too.
Do not forget my name. Do not forget me. 2 + 6
2 + 6 is so much. I was like, I can't remember the exact sequence.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Oh yeah. Speaking of tangents. All right. Derick, who's your best supporting actor here?
So yeah, I think my best supporting actor, we brought him up before. It has to be Grisha. I'm gonna probably butcher this actor's name. Léonide Massine, who is a ballerina in his own right. I guess he's a great Russian ballerina. But yeah, he was so great. He, like I said, brought all that much needed levity. He's great when they have his birthday party and kind of. He releases the tension at exactly the point that he needs to. He's also, we talked about how good he is when he's like the shoemaker and he's like that little evil imp or whatever. So yeah, he's got to be my main supporting actor outside of the main three.
Lizzy, who's your best supporting?
I put Anton Walbrook on here as well. Mm-hmm. For all the things we just said, I think he is fantastically wicked, and as I've said it a million times, but he makes the movie in the sense that his villainy makes it delicious to watch.
It is delicious to watch. I'm going to go with Léonide Massine as well, for the reasons that Derick said. He's an incredible dancer, and in that role of tough choreographer who's not always running ballet class, but when he is, like, it's different. He can be demanding without being so harsh, and that's very fun out of a character. I had to look it up. Crazy to say, this actor was born in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And he was 54 years old when this movie came out.
That's crazy.
He's dancing like that at 54 years old, maintaining that figure, because when you devote yourself to the craft like he did, you keep it up.
Yeah.
All right, Derick, give me a hidden gem of this movie.
So I'm going to go a little bit of a different route. I had something written down, but I'm actually going to change it up because I'm going to say a hidden gem and something that's underappreciated. I'm going to say Martin Scorsese, who obviously didn't have anything to do with the creation of this movie, but he was instrumental in the fact that we have this movie today. Because this film, a lot of guys like Scorsese and a lot of his contemporaries idolized this movie and, had such reverence for Pressburger and Powell. But it was not in good shape by like the 80s and 90s. It was really starting to deteriorate. Those vibrant colors were really fading. It was the original negative was yellowed. It had mold on it. And around like 2006, I want to say, Scorsese led this charge to have a digital restoration done and to bring it back to its former glory. And it was no small task. They basically redid every single frame. I know that Scorsese's the longtime collaborator, Thelma Schoonmaker, was instrumental in that too, because interestingly enough, in the 80s, Scorsese introduced Schoonmaker to Michael Powell, and they were actually married for the last 6 years of Michael Powell's life.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm going to say, we would not have this movie. It might have been like a lost film, might have been a film that, we just couldn't really appreciate if it wasn't for Marty.
That's great. Great effort there in order to allow new generations to witness, experience, and to love this movie. Lizzy, what's your hidden gem?
My hidden gem actually was a scene that I've already talked about, but I just love how the little liberties that they were able to take during the dance sequence, particularly the newspaper flowing around and how she's dancing with the newspaper, and then automatically, very quickly, a man comes in to replace it. And it's almost as if he's representing Father Time. And it was a quick scene, but I thought it was so powerful, probably the most powerful out of the 17-minute sequence in its whole. And I absolutely loved it. It was haunting, and it was just, I loved it so much. I really tip my hat to Maria Shearer. She did an epic job.
Yeah. There are tons of hidden gems in this, but I'm not going to cheat like I normally do. I'm just going to pick one. The focus on the programs, the ballet advertisements, and even the way that like the destination signs are like wheat pasted onto the luggage.
Right.
The atmosphere of this time period was so vivid in even the quote unquote dull things. When the camera focuses on a program and you get to see, and you're kind of looking like, oh, it says, featuring Victoria Page, and like orchestration by Julian Craster. Like this is very cool. It feels real. Like these guys we followed, like they made it. Look, their names on there. It's not the same for like Lermontov, who had already been in this power, but that was, I think, kind of special to see. Yeah. All right, this is a tough one, Derick. You have to do it. Maybe you don't want to do it, but you got to replace one cast member and suggest a replacement for it. Who do you recast in this movie?
I think that, he's not bad in it. Like I said, like we have to do it. I think Marius Goring as Julian Craster, he's good. He does a really great job, but he doesn't like kill it like the other two leads. I think I wouldn't say weak link, but he's not as strong as either of them. And I was like, I don't know who would have been the right age in the 40s. So I'm just going to choose somebody completely, because this is a hypothetical situation.
I like that too. Yeah, go for it.
I'm just going to say Ryan Gosling, put like modern day Ryan Gosling in that role. We already brought up La La Land. I think he could, have a similar performance to the one he gives there and do a really good job with it.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a talented everyman. He's kind of along for the ride. Okay. What's your recast, Lizzy?
So he is my best supporting. I really, really liked Anton Walbrook. I don't want to replace him, but for the fun of the game, the entire time that I'm watching this, because of course I'm unfamiliar with Anton Walbrook's work, but the entire time that I'm watching it, I'm thinking to myself that he is giving me massive Vincent Price vibes. And that is who I would replace him with. I think he would take the villainy to like a whole new level to me if it was Vincent Price. So
that's the right choose.
That's right. So I'm like, he wants so badly, especially one of the scenes that I really love is when they make the announcement, or he sees the newspaper announcement that they've married, and you can kind of see that like dark side come through. I think Vincent Price would have really killed it in
that. He would, as he kind of would in many things. I actually also went for, if you had to recast Lermontov, and I did it more modern, and I've got two answers here. And one of them is going to be hard for Lizzy to hear, but I think that you might like it.
Okay.
Victor Garber as Lermontov.
I would love that.
Because he's so kind and so loving on screen, but to see him play a little weirdo, I
know it would make. Oh, I love him so much. Yeah. He's so lovable. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, that would be really hard to watch, but yes. I think I would be into it though. I think he can do it.
I think he could do it. And my second option would be for a little more unhinged would be Sean Penn. He could do that.
Ooh, yes, he could. He has that like manic energy that I think could really bring an interesting layer to it for sure.
I could see it.
Yeah, it's a fun game. All right, what's the best shot here, Derick? Best shot of the movie, not the scene, just the cinematic moment.
It's the jumping into the shoes. Like it's like almost exactly at the midpoint of the whole movie, and I think it's the point that the entire rest of the movie revolves around, and it just lets you know, hey, this is what you're in for. It's just cool old school. It's kind of one of those moments that's like, how did they even do that in the 40s? You know, like it looks so rad.
Like a stop motion almost. My son's super into that right now.
And you can see it. Like you can see the transition. You don't need to rewind it. You see that, oh, that was a little movie magic, and it's noticeable. That's okay. I loved it still. Lizzy, what about you? Best shot?
I think it's called, is it the whip pans? I loved that, where she's dancing in Swan Lake in the very beginning, and as she's spinning, the camera is kind of spinning with her to try to put you in her POV. And as it's spinning, it's slowly focusing on Anton's character, on Lumentoff. And it's just really very interesting shot. And I have to imagine that I know that they did some version of that in Black Swan.
Oh yeah,
where
Aronofsky almost lifts it exactly. Like, and that's
yes.
the same. It's in Swan Lake once again. So you're just like, I remember when I first saw it, I was like,
yes.
He's
He's like clapping. He's like, attack for like her spins. And to me, it felt like a direct nod to it. And it was a very super interesting scene. And it felt very realistic of putting yourself into Vicky's shoes.
Yeah, that is cool. And it's kind of an iconic type of ballet move. And it makes me think about, we were talking about stage shows earlier. Now, I've seen Cats on stage, and Cats is about music and movement. And one of the characters it's a fun cat character, but the technical aspect of his presence is he's supposed to do 24 pirouettes in a row.
My goodness.
And he does every single night. It's called the Conjuring Turn. It's the magical cat, Mr. Mistopheles. He has to do that. And so anytime you see difficult things, I think the really quick up and down that's shown in that scene as well, like it's making my feet hurt. And one of the hardest things, just listeners, if you're going to watch this movie, watch it with friends, watch it alone, watch it with family, but try to do it without having a dancer in the room. Otherwise, you're never going to get through it because they're going to talk your ear off.
That's right.
For me, the best shot is during the dress rehearsal, the first dress rehearsal of the Red Shoes. Craster is leading the orchestra while Vicky is practicing. And this is after they have both been kind of elevated a little bit. And they've been sparring at the last lunch. And she mentions something about, like, this is the wrong tempo or something like that. And Craster says, my downbeat acts as a pause. You come in on the second beat. You see this baton? She says, yes. Well, follow it. And when he does that, you get a shock on her face. You get the intensity on Craster's face. And you get our little weirdo, Lermontov, sitting behind with this, like, yes, they're growing.
Delighted, yeah.
It's, the Mr. Burnsy, Derick. And it was, he's delighted to see, look what I have wrought. I'm creating these monsters, my little family of monsters. I thought that was great. What is your best scene, Derick?
I mean, it has to be that 17-minute sequence. Like, it's so show-stopping and phenomenal, and the whole movie revolves around it. And I already said, I think it's not just the best scene of this movie, but I think it's one of the greatest film sequences of all time. It really shows off how unique the medium of film is, because that's something you can't do with a novel or with a piece of music or even with ballet, because it uses all of the elements of all these different mediums in a way that really only film can do, with the music and the visuals and the special effects coming in. It's trippy, and you have the moments like you mentioned where she's dancing with a newspaper man, or the conductor turns into Lermontov and it turns back into the creepy guy, Craster, and it turns back into Craster, and it's so good. And even if just from a visual standpoint it kills it, but it does so much storytelling without speaking a single word of dialogue, and you just understand it. It feels exactly what it's like to be just like lost in your like when you're on stage and you're really feeling it. So it's so good.
That's a great description too. Yeah. High praise. What is your best scene, Lizzy?
Mine's the same. It just feels too iconic not to recognize, and for all the things that you just said. And you're not just watching a beautiful play. You're watching so much foreshadowing of what's to come. So it's not only is it a beautiful scene, but it's also a scene that really serves a purpose of warning you what you're about to watch unfold in the next half of the movie. And it's breathtaking. I loved it.
It is a great scene. My best scene is not as large or impactful. It's Lermontov walking through as sort of the patron, the impresario, checking in with everybody right before the first performance begins. We have Lubov, who has misplaced the shoes. We have a door that won't close. And our old man, Ratov, Sergei, he's like, I can't get the door to close. And he's like, it'll be fine. And he's walking through with some of the emeritus members, the guys who they're kind of along for guidance. And it shows that as maniacal and as conniving as he really shows us to be, there's a period of time where to everyone that he interacts with, he is being a kind father figure in this moment. But what you know is that, well, that's because the performance is on the line. The product is ready to roll out. And so I need to put this face on. And so I like that sort of double take on that. Okay, a couple left. Derick, what is the best wardrobe or the best makeup moment for you? Tons to choose from here.
I mean, I think the best wardrobe has to be the titular red shoes. Like, I don't know how I could choose anything else, if I'm being honest. They're, pivotal to every single thing that happens. They look great. There's that moment when they're like going down the line, looking at all the different shoes, and they're like, this one. They really bring out like the whole Technicolor red of it, and thematically, they're so important. Yeah,
that's true. Lizzy, you going with the red shoes as well?
No, I had no choice. I had something else written down, and then towards the end of the movie, I was forced to put down Julian's black leather trench coat because it just felt like such a choice. It was like such a Matrix kind of look. I was like, this feels like so. Yes, like that was such a decision, Julian. Why would you wear that?
He had to look real sad, walking slow, like Charlie Brown.
And I felt that everything was so vibrant and beautiful and colorful, and I loved every single wardrobe decision. And then that coat walked in, and it was so shiny and so bold that I had a really hard time focusing on anything else. It's like, what were you thinking? Yeah. Oh my gosh. And you just came from a performance.
He makes the trip on the train down there, and he's stewing, thinking about this thing, and he's wearing this dark leather coat. And within 2 minutes, he's on his knees begging with his face in her bosom.
Were people wearing black leather trench coats in the 40s? I mean, was that even like a thing? Like, to me, I just feel like, I mean, it had to have been.
Wearing black leather trench coats in the 40s.
Yeah. It was just such a choice. It was, I couldn't unsee it once it was there. So it had no other choice.
So I love so much about our wardrobes, specifically about the immersion here. Essentially everything that Vicky wears after the initial ball and that is not involving a tiara is, I think, very posh. Irene, the other prima ballerina, looks great in everything, and she's got her dog.
Yes.
And I know it seems kind of unfair that I seem to be leaning towards our Lermontov character too much, but I generally go with, if I can wear it, I want it to talk about it. He has like a going to the train outfit. He wears it twice. It is a black suit with a white shirt and a cream-colored tie, and his hat is kind of a straw hat. He has a cane. He's wearing white spats. He's wearing spats in the 40s. He's wearing white spats over his shoes. And if you notice, he's got the cream-colored tie over a white shirt, and tucked into his jacket pocket are a pair of cream-colored gloves.
Ooh.
That is bold.
Snazzy.
I loved it. His glasses are dated, but even still, like anytime I can say something like, could I pull that off? Man, I really like that. Yeah. Although I will say, I just, it's been 3 years, but I just shaved off my mustache. and seeing his little tiny mustache all movie did take away from my enjoyment of his character. All right, last two. You got to change one thing about this movie, Derick. What do you change?
Do I have to change something? Is that the rules? Can I just?
It's the game.
All right, then there only. I guess if I have to choose one, there's a line delivery when she's like, "I'm leaving," and Craster goes, "Hooray!" and he just throws the clothes in the air.
All of his ties.
That was just like, that was a weird choice.
It was a weird choice.
It was very weird. Very like It's a Wonderful Life, like just like thrown in, like Mary.
Oh, an angel's got his wings.
Oh, that's funny.
Very old.
Mr. Potter's great. A bad man.
Only your savings alone.
That's good.
You're right. I would change that too. And I said something out loud when it happened. Like, what the? Like, it kind of just fades to black. There's no other dialogue. Just hooray.
Very childlike. Yes.
What are you changing, Lizzy?
You know, we touched on it a little bit, but I am going to change, even though I can appreciate that they possibly wanted it to be ambiguous. I do want to change the way that Lermontov delivers that Vicky is not going to dance in this dance or any other dance. I found it, I could not immerse myself in what was happening and in the scene because I was so terribly distracted by the way he was speaking. So I think I would have liked, and honestly, he could have gone apathetic, or he could have gone, very overwhelmed and overcome with grief. I honestly think I could have appreciated either, but this like weird screaming felt just like super, super distracting. You honestly put the best word by it. You said it was alien, which I completely agree with. That would be the one thing I'd change.
Yeah, I want to believe that it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable, in which case, fine keeping it uncomfortable feeling. For me, my change one thing is not to make the movie shorter. I'm on a weird kick where nice. 2 hours and 4 minutes feels right for this movie. That's not what I want out of it. I want, at the end, Craster's plea to Vicky when he's in that awful black leather jacket. I need something about that to change, but I'm not sure how. I wrote down it might be the coat he's wearing. It might be how he drops to his knees to beg. It might be the idea that Lermontov is in the room, or that all these people keep coming in to like interrupt her. It's hard for me to say. I don't know. It seemed in a movie where we are looking at like the personal lives of these people, like love winning over this drive, that last argument for love seemed weak.
I agree.
And so I can't strengthen it. I just think it needs strengthening. So that's mine.
I can appreciate that. I like that.
Okay. Last one. Best quote, Derick, for the Red Shoes.
I believe it's when he says, a couple of people say music is everything.
Yeah. Yeah, when describing what they're doing. The music is everything. Mm-hmm. And obviously, you say that in front of the dancers a lot.
Yeah.
you really,
right.
Yeah. What are you really trying to communicate? Lizzy, what is your best quote?
To me, it's the very last thing that Vicky says, where it is all about the delivery, where she's like, take off the red shoes. It's almost as if in that exact moment, because I'm of the camp. I think it's like constructivism. I think it's this idea of like your thoughts and your feelings are kind of all formed by your experiences. I think that's right, but I could be getting that wrong. Someone can chime in and tell me from a psychological perspective if I've gotten that wrong. But I think it's this school of thought that all of the thoughts and feelings that you're having are completely based by, it's like that environmentalistic approach. And so I don't think that the shoes are enchanted or supernatural. I think that she has been so immersed in this role of saying that these shoes are like, I cannot take them off. These shoes like must dance, that I think that she's just been so overwhelmed that she was overcome in a moment of grief and just became the character in real life. And I think her asking Julian to, she goes, take off the shoes. It's like this final way of succumbing and understanding that she was wrong and just giving in to her fate. And it's a very haunting moment for sure.
Yeah. There's a bunch that I wanted to choose, and here's where I get boring. Here's where my dedication to the craft gets in the way of what I personally want. Is that in a manager role, I've got a team of 15, and I work in a company where a lot of departments work together. That if I can find any quote in a movie that has some way, like an implication for teamwork or implication for people working together, I'll pick it, even if there are funnier lines or even if there are more impactful lines. And the one that I chose was after that scene where they're kind of one last check before the first Red Shoes performance goes on. Livy, the older composer, is saying like, "Hey, things are going great. We really pulled it off." And he says, "My dear Livy, not even the best magician in the world can produce a rabbit out of a hat if there isn't a rabbit already in the hat." And what that means to me is that it's all this preparation, it's all of these people that are here to pull off the magic. It's probably not true. It's probably not how he really feels. It's just a phrase he would say. But the idea that nothing can be successful due to somebody coming in and using a superpower. It's just us doing a great job at what we're good at.
Yes.
And it's got to be there first. It wasn't luck that we got here. And so I anytime I see something like that, I really dig it.
I like that.
It's a very, very good quote, honestly.
We are going to rate this movie on a 5-star scale, but before we do, Derick, I want to give you one last chance to plug some of your efforts.
Yeah, thank you. So, like we mentioned at the top, my podcast is the Underrated Movie Podcast, where we talk about underrated movies and ones that, might not get talked about on other shows. So, I would never get a chance to talk about the Red Shoes, for example, on Underrated, but I've gotten to talk about a lot of really great films. Recently did a whole mini series on director's cuts. Just wrapped that up with Kingdom of Heaven not too long ago. I do a couple other podcasts as well. We mentioned the Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, which I do whenever there's a new Marvel movie that comes out, and I also do one every other week because Underrated comes out on Mondays. Every other Monday, on the Mondays when it doesn't come out, I do a podcast with a buddy of mine that's more of a just kind of what we've been watching, recently released film review type show called the Midnight Film Society. I've also got a Patreon, so just go patreon.com/underrated movie podcast called Underrated Disc 2. Got a bunch of bonus stuff there. Episodes come out a week early. But yeah, Underrated Movie Podcast on however you're listening to this, on all the socials to find all that stuff.
Awesome. Well, if you need a guest to do an underrated movie from 2001 featuring B2K, you got served. The incredible inner city versus suburban kids dance off featuring Steve Harvey as Mr. Rad.
Whoa.
You got a guest.
Okay, I'll have to mark that one on the list.
You don't know now, but you gonna find out. All right, rating. We do 5 stars here. You are allowed to do half stars if you like, 5 being the highest, half star being the lowest. Derick, what do you rate The Red Shoes?
Oh, this is a 5-star movie. This is unquestionable. Like, from the moment I saw it, I was just like, yeah, perfect, 5 stars. No notes. Let's go.
Okay, Lizzy, are you on the same boat?
I am. I think this movie is enchanting. It's a really beautifully, visually stunning movie. I think the story holds up. Wonderful acting. I mean, there's really, truly no notes. But this is a movie that I would recommend and watch again.
Okay. Well, I am the low man on the totem pole here. I'm going 4.5. And I think I could, if I really, really wanted to, make a case for some things about its age or about its length or about the nitpickiest of things to say why a movie like this maybe doesn't have as broad of an appeal. I see the 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I know that means when I see that, I know that it's overly weighted, overly biased towards the people that want to see the movie or want to experience a movie because of its accolades, as opposed to a general audience. All that being said, I would have to fight to try to make this a 4-star movie. This is a 4.5 for me. I thought it was extremely enjoyable. I will revisit it somewhere down the road, and I also would recommend it. But speaking of movies to recommend, we got to cover another movie next week, Lizzy. Can you give me some options?
Yes. All right. So next week, it's going to be all about raising the stakes. It's going to be gambling themed. Option 1, The Hustler from 1961. An up-and-coming pool player plays a longtime champion in a single high-stakes match. Option number 2, 21 from 2008. Inspired by real events and people, 6 MIT students become trained to be experts in card counting and blackjack and subsequently take Vegas casinos for millions. Option number 3, The Gambler from 1974. Axel Fried is a literature professor with a gambling vice. He's lost all his money and borrows from his girlfriend, then his mother, and finally some bad guys that chase him. Despite all of this, he cannot stop gambling.
I love these options because they are kind of alike, but
Right? Yeah.
kind of alike. I forgot I saw 21. I think I liked it, but
It's
we're
a
not
good
going
movie.
for it. We're going with The Pool Hustler. The Hustler, 1961, the up-and-coming pool player.
All
That's
right.
what I'm interested in.
Let's
Yeah.
go.
All right. Well, Derick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was an absolute blast.
Yay.
And
I'm
Lizzy,
so
as
glad you
always,
came on.
thank you very much as well.
Yes. Always a blast.
And thank you, all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pandora, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a like on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. Producing and providing this podcast is fun, but not free. We invite you to support the show at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/retromovieroundtable. Any contribution is much appreciated and will go towards making the show better for you, the listeners. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Lizzy?
Cooper, you're an amazing dancer and you're a great choreographer, but as a boyfriend, you kind of suck.